All righty, folks. Welcome to Wednesday evening study, our series. Let me get my screen share going here. We are looking at the Bible and the Josiah Manifesto. New book came out a few months ago by Messianic Jewish Rabbi Jonathan Cahn. Yeah, I can go away. Ooh, and it's at the new bookstore. So we're seeing what he has to say, looking at the related scriptures and having our own conversations and coming to our own conclusions from there. So good stuff we've been considering so far. Two quick items of note before we dive in. We will be in the book of Joel, chapter 2, if you'd like to flip over there and get settled and situated there. During the Sunday afternoon topical discussion, one of the things that came up as far as God removing people for their good and for other things to take place in their absence, we mentioned the Civil War and President Lincoln's day of prayer and the things that happened immediately after that. His prayer was based on 2 Chronicles 7, which we're also going to go to tonight. And I mentioned how President Lincoln's prayer and the resulting battles that followed were covered in what I said was Jonathan Cahn's book, Paradigm 2. There's no such thing. I was thinking Harbinger 2, but I said Paradigm 2. So just clarification there, correction there. And what happened was on April 30th, the National Day of Prayer, immediately after that, two battles happened. One was Chancellorsville, which was the gateway to Gettysburg on the east. And in the west, I looked it up. I knew it began with a P, but I couldn't remember. It was Port Gibson. Port Gibson was the battle that was the gateway for Vicksburg. So two big Union victories in Vicksburg and Gettysburg in the west and the east were preceded by Chancellorsville and Port Gibson, and those were immediately after the National Day of Prayer based on 2 Chronicles 7, led by President Lincoln. So there is that. The other thing I wanted to mention, and I'll probably touch on this in Sunday's message if we're still in 2 Corinthians, unless the Lord leads otherwise, the miracles and things. Joel, we see some miraculous things happening, and we saw, as we shared Jonathan Cahn's experience there in Cuba, saw some pretty amazing things happening that were right in line with the book of Joel. So let me find my way over here. There we go, Joel chapter 2. What I wanted to say about the miracles, have you ever found yourself saying to yourself or thinking, even saying out loud, boy, that must have been so cool to be living in the Old Testament times with all those miracles happening. Or even, wow, that must have been so cool to be there in the early days of the church, the book of Acts and all that stuff, with all those miracles happening, right? Yeah, that it would be cool to be around to see all that stuff. But one thing that occurred to me on this coming off of Sunday is that when we hear about the miracles, we tend to think, well, that's what we hear about. So we think it's actually more common than it even was back then. They were attention getters, and that was kind of the whole point. God wasn't parting seas every other weekend. These were major events that people were supposed to sit up and take notice of. These miracles were rare, and they were to be that attention getter. Hey, wait a minute, this doesn't happen every day. What's going on here? Okay, you got our attention, God. What are you doing? Where are you going with this? We talked about last week how the prior Sunday's reading from Acts chapter 2 with the day of Pentecost and people hearing the different languages had some good discussion on that. Even that miracle of brethren being able to speak in a foreign language that they had no training in. Any guesses how many times that happens in the whole book of Acts? Now, before you think of an answer, but let me tell you this. The book of Acts goes from the year 33 with Christ's ascension to about 66 or so before Paul is executed and martyred. So we got over 30 years of time across the book of Acts, and it goes from Jerusalem all the way over to Rome. So across all that time and space, how many times would we guess that the miracle of speaking in foreign languages and tongues takes place in the book of Acts? Nope. You're getting warmer.
I think of twice.
There's one other time, 3 times. It happened then in Acts chapter 2. It happened again in Acts 10 with Cornelius and them, and then it happened in Acts 19 with Ephesus. Only those 3 times that the speaking in tongues miracle take place, speaking the foreign language take place. Each time it was associated with people getting baptized into the church. It happened at 3,000 on the day of Pentecost. Cornelius and his family, the Roman Gentile centurion. And then at Ephesus, they thought they had John's baptism. Turns out they didn't. And so Paul, who did have it, with the authority that he had with his church group, they baptized them. And then they had the Holy Spirit and speaking tongues and were brought into the church fold and became their own church. But those are the only times it happens in Acts. And each time it's associated with the church and folks being brought into it. So cool stuff.
And you said 2:10.
19. Yeah, Ephesus is in Acts 19. So I thought there was some pretty spiffy stuff there. So we're going to be reading again from Joel 2. Now, just a reminder where we left off. We're going to be departing from Cuba and from the year 1999 and heading back into our own 21st century here. But before we do, just a quick reminder of where we left off. The month-long Jubilee that Castro had miraculously enough allowed to take place has come to an end. It ended in Havana in Revolution Square with Castro himself in attendance. And then Jonathan Cahn was able to come to the presidential palace and offer some gifts, including the shofar that he had inscribed. And then he gave him a Bible in Spanish and gave him a letter that he wrote that had some things of Bible prophecy in there for him. So the shofar, here's what Jonathan Cahn has to say about the shofar that he gave. If any notes there. Okay. The shofar that Jonathan Cahn gives in the presidential palace is not just a gift, but a sign, a prophetic sign. Its meaning and its mystery manifest in the years to come. It is a sign of the rise and fall of Fidel Castro. Now, we've mentioned the event was referred to as a Jubilee. We saw that Jonathan Cahn's interpreter, Felix, a native of Cuba who left as an infant when Castro came in, and he's able to be back. We see kind of a Jubilee experience for him with the return and restoration coming right back to his very own farmland that ended up already having a church built on it. But the timing of a Jubilee we haven't seen that. So we've seen the spirit of Jubilee, but not the timing of Jubilee, with a Jubilee as a reversal of what was done before. So we'll get to all that. So the good and bad news coming off of this, though for the Cuban believers, the Jubilee goes on in the form of revival. They didn't stop praising God and worshiping him and seeking him when the deadline came. But Castro doesn't lessen his grip, his iron hand off that island. He still is back to being Castro. So that's where we're going to leave Cuba in 1999. We're going to come back stateside, and we are going to be in 2001, the aftermath of 9/11, Sabbath year. So Joel chapter 2, let's pick up in verse 12. Joel 2, verse 12. Yet even now declares the Lord, return to me with all your heart and with fasting, weeping, and mourning, and tear your heart and not merely your garments. Now return to the Lord your God, for he is gracious and compassionate, slow to anger, abounding in mercy, and relenting of catastrophe. Who knows? He might turn and relent and leave a blessing behind him, resulting in a grain offering and a drink offering for the Lord your God. Blow a trumpet in Zion. Consecrate a fast, proclaim a solemn assembly, gather the people, sanctify the congregation, assemble the elders, gather the children and the nursing infants, have the groom come out of his room and the bride out of her bridal chamber. So, talking about how what the Lord is desiring is a change in heart, not merely an outward sign, how they would, whenever they were showing a sign of mourning, they would rip their clothes as a demonstration of that. But the Lord says he's more interested in a torn heart than a torn garment. And the Joel, the prophet, is proclaiming that if we turn to the Lord, return to the Lord, he could very well relent and repent and turn himself, return to him. He can turn away from the calamity that was about to happen. Again, just like the Lord told Jeremiah with the whole potter's wheel thing. If a nation's not servant, nation's defying me, and I have got calamity lined up for them, they turn and repent of their ways, I'm gonna hold off and not bring out the calamity I was about to. On the flip side, if the folks are serving me and I was, let's see, so if they were in danger, if they're serving me, but then they fall away, the blessings I was going to give them, I'm going to withhold from them, and they'll be in danger of calamity. So the Lord bases his actions on us and what we give him to work with, just like the clay on the potter's wheel, how yielding it is to his hands determines how much he can do with it. So there's that concept there. And so Joel proclaims, let's blow the trumpet, proclaim an assembly, let's come together and unite in prayer and repentance and seeking God and submitting our hearts before him so that he can bring about blessing instead of all these other things that are going on. So that's kind of the theme there in that passage of Joel. Does that make sense? Y'all kind of see that? All good there? Now let's couple that with 2 Chronicles 7. Very famous passage. It was out on a billboard in Lancaster, I remember, once upon a time. Let's see. 2 Chronicles, Kings, Chronicles. 2 Chronicles 7. First, second, there we go. 2 Chronicles 7. Let's look at verses 13 and 14. The Lord proclaims, 2 Chronicles 7:13, if I shut up the heavens so that there is no rain, or if I command the locust to devour the land, or if I send a plague among my people, and my people who are called by my name humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, I will forgive their sin and will heal their land. That was a theme verse for Abraham Lincoln's National Day of Prayer. That was a theme verse for the Washington for Jesus rally in 1980 before Reagan was elected, and very, very famous and well-known, important passage of scripture there. So we see the connection there about humbling ourselves and coming before God to receive his blessings. All good with that? So what's this have to do with 2001 and 9/11? Let us go to this one. There we are, right there. Y'all remember this? In the rubble of the Twin Towers on 9/11, a photographer was let very briefly behind the barricades to go in and take, be a photojournalist and take pictures. He saw this book there, so without even seeing what it was, he took pictures and figured he'd check it out later when he developed his film. When he developed his film, he freaked out. He wishes he had gone back and grabbed that book. It was a Bible. What page is right here? Don't know if you can see, but that's chapter 11. That's chapter 11 of Genesis. What is chapter 11 of Genesis? The Tower of Babel. In the fall of the Twin Towers, there's the Bible right there, the page for the Tower of Babel. So very striking with all that was going on. Keeping in mind too, the buildup of the Twin Towers was also with the rise of abortion from the states to the national level with Roe v. Wade, both completed in 1973. So here's what Jonathan Cahn shares about these passages and all this. In the wake of 9/11, Jonathan Cahn has a vision or just kind of an idea or a burden, a desire of a national day of prayer and repentance for America. He sees it centering on a sacred assembly in Washington, D.C., on the National Mall. In the ensuing years, he's brought into contact with someone he refers to as a great and humble man of God, a man named Kevin Jessup, who has been faithfully holding a similar vision for such a day and such a gathering. Through the years, they will touch base, pray, and seek God's will concerning it. So it's kind of marinating on a back burner over the course of years, and they're kind of letting the Lord lead on it and touching bases and seeing how it goes from here. This will tie into the Moses strand of the Josiah Manifesto. I've mentioned again, there are four main strands, and pretty much everything we're going to talk about here from the book touches on one of those four strands. Moses, King Jehu of Israel, the prophet Joel, and then King Josiah of Judah. So this whole idea of having this assembly and Joel and all that, it ties into Joel, but it's also going to tie into Moses as well, a modern day kind of a parallel going on with that. Any questions or thoughts on that? All good? Again, kind of just laying some groundwork here. Well, now we're going to fast forward to 2004. In 2004, one quick minor event, and this will tie in to Jehu. In 2004, Barack Obama comes to the national stage in the Democratic Convention of 2004. As a senator, that's when he gives his first major national speech and comes to national attention. This will tie into King Jehu of Israel. So just planting that seed there. Now we're going to fast forward to the Sabbath year of 2008. So let's talk about Jubilees. One's 50th birthday marks the end of one's 50th year. One's 50th year begins on one's 49th birthday. Remember, when we're born, we're age 0. And after we've lived a year, that's when we have our first birthday. We've completed 1 year of life outside the womb. So one's 50th birthday is the end of one's 50th year. One's 50th year begins on one's 49th birthday. We're all good with the math there, right? One has completed one's 49th year. It comes to its conclusion when one turns 50. So the 50th and Jubilean year begins at the end of the 49th year of the countdown and culminates 1 year later. So after year 49, you're now in your 50th year. You're now in your Jubilee year after you've hit 49. So this brings us to Leviticus. Let's go to Leviticus 25. Just one verse here to refresh us on the whole Jubilee thing. Leviticus 25. Leviticus 25, verse 8. You are also to count off 7 Sabbaths of years for yourself, 7 times 7 years, so that you have the time of the 7 Sabbaths of years. That is the 49 years. So that's leading into the whole Jubilee thing. So, mention that we are going to be bringing back the Jubilee with the time frame and relating that back to Cuba. So we're back in Cuba. Had a short trip in the States, but now we're back in Cuba. What happens if we count 7 sevenths of years from the beginning of Castro's reign in 1959? The 50th year, the Jubilee of Castro's rise to power, is the year 2008. Is this year significant concerning his reign? At 81 years old, beset by health problems, Castro sends a letter to Cuba and the world, posting it on the official website of the Communist Party newspaper, Grandma. Don't ask me why it's called. That's English, but anyway. It is his letter of resignation. He is resigning as president of Cuba, bringing his reign over the island to an end. It is truly the end of an era. When is this era brought to an end? In 2008, the 50th year, the 7th 7 of years, the year of Jubilee. So after his 49th year, into his 50th. Starting the countdown from the exact day that Batista set in motion his resignation. Remember, New Year's Eve, December 31st, 1958. From that day, 7 sevenths of years to the 50th year, and then 7 sevenths of days to the 50th day. The 50th day of the 50th year, what does it bring us to? The 50th day of the 50th year is February 18th, 2008. Anything of significance happened on that day? February 18th, 2008. Must be, I've got a slide for it. Ta-da, but wait, there's more, yes. It is on February 18th of 2008 that Fidel Castro sets in motion the end of his reign as leader of Cuba. Castro prepares his resignation in the Jubilean year on the exact Jubilean day of the year and day that Batista prepared his resignation. December 31st, 1958 constituted the last day of Batista's presidency. The Jubilean countdown from Batista's last full day as president brings us to the last day of Castro's presidency. Remember, Jonathan Cahn gave him the shofar, the Jubilee symbol, as a sign of his rise and fall. On the final day of 1958, Batista began planning for the end. His presidency was sealed with a letter of resignation. In the early evening of the 50th day of the 50th year from the last day of Batista's presidency, on his own last day as president of Cuba, Fidel Castro finishes writing a letter that brings his presidency to an end. Batista prepared his resignation on December 31st and planned for it to go into effect after midnight on the first day of the new year. Fidel Castro prepares his resignation on February 18th, plans likewise it will only take effect after midnight. On February 19th, 2008, Castro's resignation goes into effect. It is the 50th day of the 50th year of the very day that Batista's resignation took effect. The signing of Batista's resignation letter by the top officials in his government marked the end of his reign and the beginning of Fidel Castro's. If one counts 7 of years and 7 of days from that year, that day, and that time, one is brought to February 19th, 2008, in the early hours of the day. So it is then in these early hours that the Jubilean day begins. In accordance with the ancient mystery, it is exactly then, in the very first hours of this day, the announcement goes forth to the world that Fidel Castro's reign has come to an end. So there's the grandma publication, and that says, message of the commander-in-chief, or commandant en jefe. Hey, jefe, hey, chief. Yes, so that's it. So, after relinquishing his power, Batista headed for the plane that took him, along with his family and his top officials, out of the country and into exile. All this took place around 3 a.m. After his plane took off, news spread to the island and to the world that he had resigned and fled. On the 50th day of the 50th year from the moment of his departure, the official news site of the Central Committee of the Cuban Communist Party releases Castro's announcement of resignation to the island and to the world. It happens just around 3 a.m. This morning, the world awakens to the news of Castro's resignation on the Jubilee morning, the 50th day of the 50th year of the morning it had awoken to the news of Batista's resignation. So yeah. Now, one quick thought on what the Bible lays out and events taking place. And I appreciate what Jonathan Cahn says about this. It's a really good perspective here to think about. It is not so much that the mystery of the Bible works inside the parameters of human history. It is that human history works inside the parameters of the Bible mystery. The ancient ordinance given in the book Castro had banned has determined how long his reign would last, even from his very first day in power. So there's that. Any reactions, thoughts, or questions on how the Jubilee timing ended up playing into Cuba after all? All good? Then we are going to fast forward from the Sabbath year of 2008 to the Sabbath year of 2015. So that was Joel, and now we are going to transition back to King Jehu. So we will be first in 1 Corinthians chapter 10 for this. 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Okay. Now, 2015. Let's talk about this. Now, these Bible templates, these patterns, they involve people, leaders, prominent figures on the American national stage. It is not ultimately about them. I know in our human nature, we tend to, there's a word I'm looking for, and I can't think of it offhand, but we tend to focus on the personality or the person. We're very drawn or focused on people focused. So, but really, it's not about them. So we're going to talk about a man of controversy, but it's not about him. And it doesn't matter what one thinks of him, good or bad, or where one stands regarding him. The template, in that sense, is actually neutral. The purpose of the template is to reveal what? Reveal something about God. So we need to be able to zoom out from the people and see the pattern and the message that God is conveying. So I mentioned this is the Jehu parallel. And we're going to have someone in our modern times who will follow the Jehu pattern. Yeah, I figured y'all might be figuring out who that is by now. So in 2015 Sabbath year, we have on June 16th, the Golden Escalator Day. Trump announces his candidacy in June of 2015. He has no idea, but he is following after the pattern of an ancient king, Jehu of Israel. He walks in his footsteps and repeats his acts. Jehu is the prototype. Trump is the antitype, the fulfillment, the two different ends of the picture. Like Jehu, Trump is an unlikely contender. He is not a member of America's political establishment. He is not a politician. Many see him as unfit to govern. Jehu was a controversial and polarizing figure. He was loved by some, hated and feared by others. So is Trump. So 1 Corinthians 10, verse 11. Paul makes this point about our modern understanding of Old Testament application. So 1 Corinthians 10, verse 11. Now these things happened to them as an example, and they were written for our instruction, upon whom the ends of the ages have come. Now he wrote that 2,000 years ago about the ends of the ages, but he's talking about being in the church age now. In the ages of spiritual history, the church age is the last age before these end times start coming. In fact, the church age can be considered the beginning of the end. And so Paul is making the point here that these things that happen in real life, in real time, that are recorded in the Old Testament, which includes Jehu, these things they happened as an example. Their lives were an example. Their actions, their choices, their decisions, their thoughts. They were written for our instruction. The whole reason God had those things recorded was for us today, for our instruction, to instruct us, for us to be taught by those things, for us to learn and gain from those, because it is us in this church age upon whom the ends of the ages have come. We're heading into those end times more and more. So this is for our benefit. Now, with that, let's go back to 2 Kings and refresh ourselves a little bit on this guy, Jehu. 2 Kings. Before Chronicles. There we go. 2 Kings chapter 10. Chapter 10. Notice what it says here about this guy Jehu, who was used of God. 2 Kings 10:31. But Jehu was not careful to walk in the law of the Lord, the God of Israel, with all his heart. He did not desist from the sins of Jeroboam, into which he misled Israel. So Jehu wasn't exactly the heart of David kind of guy, even though he did some amazing things for the Lord's good. So, as did Jehu, Trump invokes the name of God, but few would speak of Trump as a man of God. As with Jehu, Trump is an enigma. And as for where his heart is at with regard to God, that remains a mystery. Many judge him as an ungodly man. Yet Trump is used of God. He is, as was Jehu, an unwitting vessel, not even realizing how God's using them. As with Jehu, and this is an important point, his faults and ways do not nullify the fact that he's used as an instrument for God's purposes. Nor, as with Jehu, does the fact that he's used as an instrument for God's purposes, that doesn't nullify his faults and his ways. God will use whom he will. Let me pause right there. So just letting that sink in and take that in for a moment. So Jonathan Cahn is making the point that these guys do some godly things, but there may be a question of how 100% on fire for God that they are and have been over the course of their lives and where they're at with that. That's, their own one-on-one relationship with God. But people have questioned, certainly with Jehu as well as Trump. But Jonathan Cahn's huge point here is their flaws and faults, which we all have, don't stop God from using them. And God using them doesn't mean they don't still have flaws and faults. Both, sometimes someone might say, well, how could God use such a person? Well, ask any pastor who's honest enough standing in a pulpit, we ask ourselves the same question, because we are intimately acquainted with our own flaws and shortcomings. How can God use us to be an example to others? So, yeah. So everyone kind of see that, the point he's making there? Any thoughts or reactions on that? Yeah.
Yeah, go back to Twin Towers.
Yeah.
It's, in seeing that reference or the Bible opened up to the Tower of Babel, which God destroyed.
Yeah.
Okay, so the terrorists were good guys?
Great question. And I love this. Someone else had had a very similar question. His name was Habakkuk. The whole book of Habakkuk, the whole 3 chapters, is him asking God, wait, you're using the Babylonians?
Yeah.
Do you know these guys? It's like Jonah saying, you want me to go to the Ninevites? Do you know these guys? Yes, he does. God used, even in Joel, the book of Joel talks about God's great army. And I love singing the song in my Pentecostal churches I was visiting. Blow the trumpet in Zion. Great is the army that carries out his word. Oh, wait a minute. We actually read Joel. It's talking about the bad guys that God uses to punish God's people. Oh, wow. So the short answer after that long answer is yes. God uses bad people to accomplish his good, even if his good is punishing or chastising or getting the attention of sending harbingers to his people to be a wake-up call. So, yeah.
And I wouldn't, like I said, I don't look at Trump like he's a bad person.
Right.
He's just he's he's better than most, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Growing up and making mistakes and whatever. But,
yeah.
That's
Well, he's very polarizing for Christians. And he has been for even us in the ministry and fellow pastors. We've had conversations and aren't all on the same page with this. And so, especially talking about, the whole point of the nation, from our founding with our founding fathers and their intention and all that. So yeah, there's not unity on this. And y'all may have seen the memes or the jokes. I'll take a few mean tweets now for $2 gas again. And the question becomes, are we electing someone to be our pastor or our Boy Scout troop leader or someone to preside over the country? And do I want a brain surgeon who is a grumpy codger, but no offense, Brother Grumpy. Do I want a brain surgeon who is a grumpy codger, but knows his stuff and does his job right? Yeah. Versus a happy guy who might be absent-minded.
Yeah. You need to sell,
Yeah.
So it's hard.
Make informed decisions. Yeah. Vote your conscience, make informed decisions. Absolutely. And understand with each package, you're getting all the pros and cons that come with that package.
They've got a very good election. Like nobody wants to be up here, kind of back when Obama, when he came out, nobody wanted to go to be president because there's a lot that's happening And so he said, hey, it's gonna take a lot of work.
Mhm.
So it's still taking a lot.
Yeah, and
It's a
let's,
little worse though.
and the most important thing to remember is not to take God out of the equation, but actually flip the script and make God the center of the equation and the conversation. And has God and can God use someone unlikely? Could he use President Biden? Sure. Biden is present during the last Sabbath year we had. And I think that allowed some of these things to take place that happened, that we've seen with the economy, and that we're going to see more of the effects of that coming into this new year. So I think God rises and has the rise and fall of leaders, like with Castro in the 50 years. I believe God has it in his hand, in his timing, so that even though some quote unquote bad things need to happen, that they are part of a bigger picture that's being worked out. God's ultimate plan is playing out. And our job is to not get, again, so hyper-focused on one man or the other, or any individual, but to step back and see God's use of any individual for his greater purpose.
So even though this perhaps appears, president.
Yeah.
We gotta pray for him.
We need to be praying for our current president.
Our president. And
Yeah.
gotta pray for him.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, a little more on the Trump-Jehu comparisons here. Jehu was a warrior. He was a fighter. He was actually part of the army under King Ahab and his wife Jezebel, under the nation of Israel. Jehu was a warrior, a fighter. Trump is a fighter, man who fights with almost everyone and thrives on it. Jonathan Codd's words. The biblical account of Jehu's rise to power presents a picture of, now this is Jehu in the Bible, his rise to power is a picture of wildness, impulsiveness, and unpredictability. Trump is seen by supporters and opponents alike as wild, impulsive, and unpredictable. Go back to 2 Kings chapter 9. What's that?
That's the thing, he was
Yeah.
there for the people,
Yeah,
even though it wasn't godly,
Yeah.
in maybe all sense, but he was there for the people, they didn't like it.
yeah. When I personally, my considerations, while I could have a wish list of characteristics, my considerations are the most godly policies. When it comes to a politician, I look at policies and actions versus words. And in his case, I was very uncertain. I mean, I was as far as on the primary side, I was voting for someone else. And when he got the nomination for the party, I thought, okay, well, it's a better choice than the other, especially Supreme Court nominations and all that stuff. So policy wise, I'm like, okay, but let's see what happens. I was pleasantly surprised how not all, but many of the policies were in line with biblical principles. So I was appreciating that. 2 Kings 9. I'm sorry, were you about to say something?
That's where the unpredictable and impulsiveness was a good thing, because the career politician is predictable what they're gonna do.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
The decisions, they're gonna go down the money trail and whatever, and then Trump just throws a curveball.
Yeah.
And does what's the right thing,
Yes.
and keeps the other nations guessing.
Yes.
Yeah.
They don't want
Well,
to
absolutely.
gas line with their car, and
Exactly.
the red line.
Yeah, right. And so Jehu, very much the same. Because he didn't conform to the norms, and he just did what he did and did a lot of really good things. People were like, oh, snap. And they sat up and took notice. And when you can't predict what someone's going to, if you're a bad guy and you can't predict how harshly a good guy's going to react to something bad you do, you might hold off on doing something bad. And so that does play to your advantage. And there is a sense of knowing what you're doing and what you present versus what you're planning. And there's that using that unpredictability to your own advantage to further something and accomplish something. But anyway, 2 Kings 9, verse 20. So what happens is Elisha has anointed Jehu as king, and we already have a king of Israel and a king of Judah in the split kingdom. So Jehu is now coming down, riding down And one of the kings is out looking at him and has the guy on the lookout and has sent a couple guys to go see what's going on. And they end up falling behind Jehu and coming along with him and not coming back to report. So the watchman, verse 20 of 2 Kings 9:20, the watchman reported, he came up to them, but he did not return. And the driving is like the driving of Jehu, the son of Nimshi, for he drives furiously. So that's what he was known for, I guess. So Jehu's ascent to the throne began as he mounted a chariot and embarked on a race to the capital city and the seat of governmental power. Jehu was said to have driven his chariot as one who was crazy, a madman. Trump's race to the White House is described in similar terms. Now, get this. Just like Ahab and Jezebel, former kings, king and queen of Israel, Jehu had been in the army and been carrying out, their orders and plans. Trump was originally a supporter of abortion. He had been friends. Just as, Jehu had been serving under and associated with Ahab and Jezebel, so too, Trump had been friends with the former First Lady and her husband, Bill Clinton. So we have Jehu, Jezebel, and Ahab. Now, I have not gone this route in our classes because our focus has been moving forward with end time stuff. But one of Jonathan Cahn's books that I haven't even brought into class is The Paradigm. The whole book of The Paradigm is how Bill and Hillary Clinton follow the template and pattern of Ahab and Jezebel. Very fascinating read. But so Jehu was originally serving with Ahab and Jezebel. Trump was originally a supporter of abortion, been friends with former First Lady, her husband, Bill Clinton. But as did Jehu, Trump turns against abortion. When he begins his race to the White House, he does so as a staunch opponent of the practice. So Jehu turned on the house of Ahab, and Trump takes a different path now from where he had been before. Another interesting thing about this guy, Jehu. Jehu formed an alliance with one particular man who represented the religious conservatives of the land, Jehonadab. Jehonadab was known for his piety and his lifestyle of abstinence from alcohol. Jehonadab accepted Jehu's invitation to join him in his chariot. The two men rode together in Jehu's race to the throne. Let's see here. Yeah. So, do we have a parallel? Oh, we got a chat. Actually, that book is too yucky. Yeah, the book deals a lot with the abortion issue, and it's a heavy read. It is. It's Ashley's been trying to read it, but it's a hard one to get through. But yeah. So again, Jehonadab, known for his piety, his lifestyle of abstinence from alcohol, he accepts Jehu's invitation to join him in his chariot. The two men ride together in Jehu's race to the throne. Do we have a modern parallel to Jehonadab joining Jehu? Trump likewise makes an alliance with one man. Here is the modern Jehonadab. Survey says it's thinking. There we go. Trump likewise makes an alliance with one man, Mike Pence. Pence likewise represents the religious conservatives of the land, as was Jehonadab. So Pence is known for his piety, his lifestyle of abstinence from alcohol. Pence accepts Trump's invitation to join him in the race to the White House. The two will finish the race together. So there's that. And I think, yeah, we can get these last ones in. I thought you might like that. Oh, Ashley. Yes. Okay, so we can just leave that for now. So yes. 2 Kings chapter 10, verses 27 and 28. So back in 2 Kings chapter 10. 27 and 28. We had read this passage before where Jehu gathers the Baal worshipers into the building, and he's pretending, hey, let's do this great thing for Baal. All those who even make child sacrifice to Baal. All you worshipers of Baal, gather together in this building. Make sure no God worshipers are here. So they make sure they're all Baal worshipers in there. So he tells his people outside, now burn them down in that building. He says, and we'll go back up to verse 24, they entered to offer sacrifices and burnt offerings to Baal. Now Jehu had stationed for himself 80 men. That number is going to come up in a later class. 80 men outside. He said, the one who allows any of the men whom I bring into your hands to escape shall give up his life in exchange. Wow. It came about, as soon as he had finished offering the burnt offering, Jehu said to the guard and the royal officers, go in, kill them, let none come out. So they killed them with the edge of the sword. The guard and the royal officers threw them out, went to the sanctuary of the house of Baal. They brought out the memorial stones of the house of Baal and burned them. They also tore down the memorial stone of Baal, tore down the house of Baal, made it a latrine as it is to this day. So Jehu eradicated Baal from Israel. So the fall of the sanctuary of Baal is connected to the rise of Jehu. So 2 months later, after Trump's announcement on the coming off the golden escalator, that was in June. So now July, we're now in August of 2015. We're still in that Sabbath year. The ancient temple of Baal. Oh my goodness, yes. Crazy stuff. So let's see, we want number okay, 329. We're going to go up to 329. Right here. So 2 months after Trump's announcement of his candidacy, the ancient temple of Baal that had withstood the world for nearly 2,000 years falls to the ground. This is in Palmyra in the Middle East, and it was destroyed by ISIS. The ancient paradigm has manifested. When Jehu rises, the temple of Baal must fall. So just as Jehu had the sanctuary of Baal destroyed and the people with it, so too, now that Trump's rising to power, we have a temple of Baal that has been there for 2,000 years. That's now destroyed. So that happens. During Jehu's, wind down with these last two. During Jehu's ascent to power, the most prominent advocate of Baal worship was the nation's former first lady, Jezebel. During Trump's ascent to power, the nation's most prominent advocate of abortion is the nation's former first lady, Hillary Clinton. So, fast forward to October 19th of 2016, the final debate. As the two ancient figures of Jehu and Jezebel came to a head in what was their final showdown, so too the modern figures come head to head in their final showdown, their last debate, autumn of 2016. It's October 19th, Wednesday. It is in this debate that Trump directly challenges Hillary Clinton in front of the nation concerning the blood of America's children. She supports the practice of abortion. But as to Jehu, Trump opposes it and pledges to war against it. So, last thought here.
When he was for it?
He used to be.
Yeah.
He actually tells a story about some friends of his that were considering having an abortion and what happened in their situation and how that actually gave him a change of heart. Yeah, so he has a personal testimony of experience with people close to him that had to deal with that. So, when Jehu came face to face with the nation's former first lady, it meant the downfall of the latter, literally. She looked down, she was all painted up, looking down on him from above, and Jehu looks up and says, "Who's with me?" And some guys look down at him. He says, "Throw her down." So they grab her and throw her down. Horses trample her. And he goes to eat, says, "Hey, she was a king's daughter, so go ahead and bury her." They go out, there's nothing to bury her. He says, that's what the prophet said. Exactly. Nothing left, but she got trampled and eaten by the dogs, trampled by the horses, eaten by the dogs after falling from the tower. And so there's just like her skull and her hands left. So, yeah. So, when Jehu,
That's pretty real.
yeah, it's Bible. When Jehu came face to face with the nation's former first lady, it meant that her downfall. Jehu prevailed, proceeded to take the crown of kingship. Though virtually every poll shows Hillary Clinton winning decisively against Trump. Guess what? Election day, November 8th of 2016. Wait for it. Though virtually every poll shows Hillary Clinton winning decisively against Trump, the Bible paradigm says the opposite. That is, when the two come head to head, the former first lady falls and Jehu prevails. So against almost all odds and all polls, in one of the greatest upsets in American presidential history, the first lady is defeated and Trump wins the presidency. There you have it, folks.
So the blue is Hillary.
Yep. Yep.
See California.
Yeah. What is wrong with you, Fresno? So, how long was Hillary Clinton on the national stage? She came to it with her husband and remained on it with him for 22 years. After her husband, starting when he was governor of Arkansas. After her husband's presidency, she served as senator and secretary of state for 12 years. She retired from public life for 2 years, returned to run for president for 2 more years. So Hillary Clinton's time on the national stage was 22 years with her husband, and on her own 14 years. Her ancient prototype, the former first lady of Israel, whom Jehu defeated, Jezebel, she was on the national stage for 22 years with her husband, and on her own 14 years. Exactly the same. And remember mentioning President Obama coming to the national stage in 2004 at the Democratic National Convention. Jehu succeeded King Jehoram. Joram had been in power on the national stage for 12 years when Jehu came to power. Trump succeeds Barack Obama. Obama came to the national stage in the Democratic Convention of 2004. Trump comes to power in the presidential election of 2016. As Jehu came to power at the end of Joram's 12 years, Trump comes to power at the end of Obama's 12 years on the national stage. So there you have it. So we have Jehu and Joram as well from the Bible. So with all that, any thoughts? Any reactions? Questions? All just coincidences? All good? All righty. Well, let's close up shop for the evening here. We'll go ahead and stop our share, and we'll stop our recording and get ready to, let's go ahead and stand and meet in the center and close out in our season of prayer.